eventually lose to Trump. I don't really have a very sophisticated theory about this. I just think as a general rule, it's usually pretty safe to bet on the incumbent. I could see it going down a lot like 2016, where Trump narrowly wins in the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote. Fact number 4. When are you going to continue the World Leaders series? So a while ago, I started a video series slowly profiling the leaders of every country on Earth, and then I just stopped. I have explained why elsewhere, but never in a video before, so here goes. Those videos took a lot of time to make since I was literally having to research and write like 10 condensed biographies a week. And frankly, the resulting videos were just not popular enough with you guys for me to continue to justify spending that kind of time on them. And I don't blame most of you for finding them kind of boring. I found them kind of boring too. The flawed premise of the series was that world leaders are inherently interesting people. But what I learned after profiling like 50 of them is that most presidents and prime ministers are just kind of these relatively dull career politicians who have like slowly climbed the government ladder after a couple of decades. There's only so many times I can tell those kind of stories and keep it interesting. Fact number 5. What are your hobbies? I actually don't have too many. I like to draw. I like to play video games once in a while, although I am by no definition a gamer. One sort of eccentric thing that I like to do is walk really long distances, like go on a 2-hour walk from one end of a city to another. If I lived in a universe with infinite time, I would probably go everywhere by walking, just because I really like it. Frequently asked question number 6. Can you say something nice about Quebec? Well, Quebec, of course, has many very positive qualities. You know, like the Quebec the farms? All right, now let's do some Patreon questions. Eric Kloss asks, what is your process to write a YouTube video? It's not that hard for me to come up with ideas. I'm usually working on several scripts simultaneously and have a lot of different ideas bouncing around in my brain. I do a surprising amount of writing on my phone, which I guess is sort of a testament to how much I'm just kind of writing all of the time, all over the place. I do a lot of my research at the library just because I don't want to be using sources that are just regurgitated Google results or Wikipedia articles. I actually really hate Wikipedia and never use it, so I guess that's kind of a fun fact about me. Amelia Wildman asks me to explain the concept of red Tories versus blue Tories. So this is a fairly misunderstood concept in Canadian politics. Basically, at some point during the latter half of the 20th century, Canada had a party flip, kind of like the party flip that they had in America. So the Liberal Party, which had traditionally been more conservative on certain issues, became more left-wing on those issues, whereas the Conservative Party, which had traditionally been more left-wing on those same issues, became more right-wing on them. It wasn't a perfectly clean across-the-board thing, because there are certainly issues where you can see that the Conservatives have always been relatively conservative, and there are some issues where you can say the Liberal Party has always been relatively left-wing. And of course, a lot of this is bound up in, well, what does it mean to be left-wing and what does it mean to be right-wing? But there has definitely been a big party switch on issues involving trade and relations with America and sort of what we could call kind of big government issues more broadly. And just as there existed a faction of conservative Democrats after America's party flip, so too did there exist a faction of so-called red Tories after Canada's. These were some of the most contemptible figures in Canadian politics, in my opinion, because they were basically big government-loving America haters. But anyway, these days a lot of this history has been forgotten, and the media will just kind of lazily use the term red Tory to mean any moderate member of the Conservative Party. Jack Versace asks, I was wondering your opinion on how pop culture and media have influenced the attitudes and moral values of teens and adults throughout the decades. This whole business about to what degree does the media and pop culture influence broader society is, I think, one of the great unanswerable questions of modern life. And I think you see this reflected in the rather incoherent way people tend to answer it. If you ask a question like, do video games make people violent? A lot of people will be like, no, look at these empirical studies and, you know, that kind of thing. But then when you ask a sort of broader question, like, does the media affect what we think is cool or sexy or ugly? Most people will be like, yes, of course, it's no debate. I guess I'm of the opinion that pop culture is maybe best understood as a force that can kind of normalize and encourage public sentiments that are sort of already there. For example, consider the depiction of LGBT people in the media in the late 90s and early 2000s. I think you could argue that there was a kind of symbiosis happening in which public attitudes were already becoming more tolerant, but sympathetic portrayals of LGBT people in pop culture also helped provide validation and encouragement encouragement to that public as well. So I really don't think you can have one without the other. And I suspect that to the extent pop culture has ever influenced this or that generation in one direction or another, it has always been a very cooperative process. All right, and now a couple questions from the Discord. VFSDM asks, can you describe your type of humor? Well, the sort of humor that makes me laugh the loudest is just really absurd, stupid stuff. Like, this is one of my favorite all-time jokes from The Simpsons.
Look, he painted a unicorn in outer space. I'm asking you, what's it breathing?
Air?
Ain't no air in space.
There's an Air and Space Museum.
I really like the sort of humor that comes from people not taking things seriously or just being really incompetent at something. For example, another thing I find way more hilarious than I like to admit is those videos where the boyfriend tries to do the girlfriend's makeup for her. It makes me laugh just thinking about it because it is so stupid. Mr. Boy asks, what's your least favorite video of yours? Well, I've never really disliked a video that I've made all that much. I mean, some of the older videos are on kind of strange topics that I would never make a video about today, but you know, I'm aware that those were just sort of part of my learning curve as I got to this point. I guess the video I'm most embarrassed by is the Jagmeet Singh video. At the time, I really did genuinely think he was going to be this very big force in Canadian politics, when it turns out he's been one of the biggest flops of all time. I think I projected a lot of skills onto the man he just objectively did not possess, because I just kind of liked the story that I thought he represented. All right, now the top voted community tab questions. Alex asks, you become Supreme Leader of Canada. The US decides to let you take 10 of their states as a gift. Which 10 states do you take for Canada and why? Wow, a full fifth of the US. I have barely even been to 10 states, so I guess for this to be a remotely well-informed decision, I would just have to go with the 10 I have spent the most time in, which would be Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Florida, Texas, New York, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. Sorry, Nevada. Tamin asks, do you think YouTube is silencing young conservatives like Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, or even you? I talked about this a bit in my VidCon video, and I would say no. I think YouTube is probably a little bit too nervous in flagging problematic content, but I do think that conservatives should get out of their bubble a little bit on this. There are so many other communities on YouTube, including many communities on the left, who have similar martyr complexes about being silenced, which makes me think that the problem is much more structural than political. Yuki Otoku asks, you've talked briefly about your experience teaching in Japan. I know you felt isolated, but would you recommend teaching in Japan to someone else? What was the most interesting / surprising part of life in Japan to you? I don't think I would recommend it, but it obviously depends a lot on the person. A line I used to use was that in order to have a good experience teaching English in Japan, you should ideally be passionate about 2 of the following 3 things: English, Japan, or teaching. And I wasn't really passionate about any of those things. I was just kind of vaguely interested in doing something in a foreign land, and in retrospect, that was not a strong enough motivation. Most interesting or surprising thing about the country? Well, I guess one thing was just sort of how generally bad at English the Japanese are. In a lot of other countries, educated middle-class people tend to be relatively good at basic conversational English, but this was not the case in Japan, in my experience, which is the whole reason why they had to import foreigners like me. Shane Sheffield asks, where did your love for the United States come from and why, since most Canadians hate the United States? I grew up in a very pro-American family. Both my parents actually wanted to emigrate to the United States at various times, and as a result, I don't think I was really raised in the climate of casual anti-Americanism that I think most Canadians are. My parents would often take us on vacations to the US, and they would always praise everything about America. To this day, I think the only really consistently anti-American thing that my parents ever say is that Americans are too fat. But beyond that, I also grew up with a strong sense that, you know, it was bad to discriminate and stereotype. And I realized early on that a lot of the ways that Canadians talk about Americans is just a kind of lazy prejudice that seems designed to stir up hatred and division for its own sake. And I'm just not into that. Mr. Confused asks, what country do you want to visit most in each continent? That is a fun question. In North America, I would legitimately like to visit Greenland someday. I've always had a fascination with it, even before its recent entry into the headlines. In South America, I would basically like to visit anywhere, but I'm hoping to visit Chile soon because I have a friend that lives there. It will be my first time on the continent. In Africa, I would really like to visit South Africa, which I'm also hoping to arrange a trip to someday soon. In Asia, I would like to go back to Japan just to see how things have changed since I was there. But if I had to pick somewhere new, I would really like to go to